All right, we're back again with another Pat Stedman podcast interview, whatever we're calling this these days. And today we're here with the great, brilliant psychologist Mark Derian.
Therapist, officially therapist.
Therapist. Okay.
Psychotherapist.
Psychotherapist. All right. So
emotional coach.
We're gonna get into that because I want to hear about some of those updates. But I worked with Mark a few years ago, and Mark was, I mean, I can't understate this. Like, I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and you get a little bit of, insight from one person, and it helps. But I credit Mark with some of the most profound and meaningful breakthroughs in my personal life and my inner work. Just kind of like keys that I was looking for, nobody was providing. Mark provided. My wife worked with Mark, had a similar experience, and I refer tons and tons of clients to him because he's incredible at what he does. So,
thank you. Wow.
I want to hear a little bit about what's been going on with you the last few years, because I know that you're a bit of a, you didn't want to be called a psychologist. I know you're a little bit of a, what happened? What happened? Give us a lowdown.
Just over the past couple of years.
Yeah, because like I know that you left a program, or they kicked you out, whatever. I don't know.
Got kicked out, yeah.
Yeah, and then you were going to be going back into it, I thought, for a period of time, but maybe that didn't. I don't know. It's been almost 2 years since we spoke, so.
Yeah, so probably last time we spoke, I was in another doctorate program, but I ended up dropping out of that. So I'm officially a college dropout.
So I mean, I think it was a good decision because.
Oh yeah, I mean,
don't throw pearls before swine. It's not.
Oh yeah, whenever I get stressed out, I just think of that decision that I made, and I just feel total relief and serenity. So yeah, it was great.
So, I mean, without you needing to necessarily go into any drama you don't feel comfortable going into, but what, if you don't mind telling us what exactly happened, because I talked to Dr. Taylor Burroughs recently, and she's a PhD. She was in that whole world, and then she just left it. I mean, she left it herself. And
right.
I know that the stuff that you've been doing, it's not really used in regular psychology. And I imagine they had some resistance to sort of your I'm blanking on the word, but basically your unique take on things, iconoclastic view.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, so what happened at the most recent university that I dropped out of is, God, what exactly happened? It's like a bunch of things converge at once. But I guess mainly what happened is I was in my fourth, diversity, inclusion, whatever class, and I couldn't transfer credits. And by this time, I already have enough credits to get my PhD, actually. Well, actually, I don't know if that's true. I either have enough credits in addition to all the classes I've audited. I have definitely enough time in a classroom, sitting in a classroom to get a PhD. And I don't like sitting in a classroom. So I don't want to do it any longer than I have to, but I was already doing it longer than I had to. And so I was in my fourth one of these diversity classes, which there may be some confusion about this. These aren't difficult. I was actually talking to somebody, and part of his question of me leaving my PhD program is, was it difficult? Were you failing? Like, no, that wasn't it. It's not the rigor. In fact, if it was rigorous, I would actually like that more. It's something for me to latch onto. But yeah, to make a long story short, I was in my fourth diversity inclusion class. And, the entire class, they say, you don't have to agree with what we're saying. You can have your own opinion. We just want you to understand where we're coming from. And I think I do understand. But for my final presentation, I disagreed, and they didn't pass me, and they didn't give me a good reason other than I remember arguing with the professor. He said, we don't feel like you get what's going on. I'm like, look, you're going to hang whether I pass this course and whether I get a degree on what your feelings are, which is, I mean, if you want to get into that whole worldview, yeah, they would do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, forget this. I mean, the only reason I would stay in the PhD program is to get supervision, but I already got a plenty of supervision, not enough official hours to get a PhD, but with supervision, there's a really steep learning curve, and after that, there's really not that much. It's more about sanitizing you than anything else, from my perspective.
I agree with you.
So I wasn't getting any help there, and so I left, and I doubled down on my own practice and what I'm doing, and I'm happy I did.
So you are a licensed therapist, though?
Oh, no, because I did get my master's, and so I could go and get a license. In fact, I have the tests up here on my cork board of tests I could take to get a license to be a licensed therapist. You don't have to be licensed to say you're a therapist. Okay. But the problem with that is there are a lot of confines on what I would be able to do, who I would be able to talk with. But the main issue is I just think at this point, the APA, the American Psychological Association, it's honestly, I just don't see it as any other way as just being unethical of being a part of it and supporting it. Because they hold views that I think, I mean, it's interesting. I was just talking with my buddy about Ben Franklin and how he owned slaves, but yet he was against slavery. Same thing with Thomas Jefferson, these guys, or John Locke, the guy who came up with individual rights, owned stock in a slave trading company. It's like, how could these guys have this dissonance to do this? And I'm not saying that we're academics now. It's equivalent to the slave trade morally. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, not even close. But at a certain point, you think, do I really want to be supporting this institution by trying to get licensed, by going after these, APA endorsed degrees? And the answer is no. I mean, if it protected the client at all, I would, but it doesn't. It hurts the client. It protects you, the therapist, the psychologist. It's an extortion racket. That's ultimately what it is. It's like, we're going to protect you. We're going to say you're valid as a therapist by, going through these grueling clinical hours that really don't amount to much and vastly depend on the kind of supervision you get. And we're going to protect you. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm just not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. Good for you, man. Good for you. I mean, it really is. It's kind of their own. They're trying to mold people and really push out people like you who are doing things that actually benefit people. And
yeah, they don't know they're doing it. I mean, there's no intention behind it. They're just honestly, not smart enough is a really brute way of putting it, but they just don't have the intellectual capacity to really help people on a fundamental level.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have I sat in, PhD seminars, with a lot of, supposedly important people? And do we talk about what human nature is? Do we talk about the nature of free will? Do we talk about what is a human? It's none of that.
I mean, it honestly seems a lot these days that it's the opposite. It's trying to find different methodologies and to try to convince you of things that, are, at best limited, not a comprehensive view of a situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the main religion, I guess you could say, small r religion in academia, I mean, it's no surprise, is Marxism.
Yeah. And
whether that's, originally Marxism was the have or have-nots. Mm-hmm. Now it's the white or white-nots, the men or the men-nots. And it's just all driven by this ideology that you are 100% constructed by society. Mm-hmm. Which is the opposite of therapy. Yeah. Therapy is, it's the exact opposite. I mean, look, if there was if these ideas really gain traction, then there is no such thing as therapy, because therapy is looking in at yourself, right? How are you? Of course, society constructs us to some degree. Of course, we're products of society. Nobody denies that. And of course, that can be frustrating when society can pigeonhole people as a certain race or gender. Of course, that happens. But is that the main determinant in your life? And that's a profoundly, impactful claim to make. And they don't realize how impactful that really is when they make it, because they don't think about it to that degree. So.
Right. I mean, it takes away people.
You get off topic already?
I mean, look, it takes away people's individual agency. But what I want to just say for the audience here is that you know, some of the people who watch me, you know, kind of in more dissident circles, whatever. I want just to be understood that Mark is like none of that stuff. Mark is like as moderate as it
Oh,
comes.
I'm more liberal than anything. And
Yeah.
that's why it
Yeah.
was just incredible to me. I mean, I am a liberal like puss. Like that's what I am. And so for me to go in these classrooms and, you know, say this stuff, I mean, I didn't realize how bad it got until I went back to grad school in, you know, 2011.
Yeah.
Which I guess was right around when the CRT thing and the, you know, that all was taken off. So
Yeah, I only experienced a little bit of it at the last year of college, and I graduated 2010. And it was like the
yeah.
last semester of my senior year, and it like kind of confused me, and it was like whatever, you know, I've graduated a month, like I don't care.
Well, all these ideas were there, you know, way before. I mean, when I went to college from 2001 to 2006 and a half, I spent a lot of time in college. But I mean, if you look back, I mean, I think these ideas were there present even in the 30s and 40s. They just have not come to fruition until now. So
Yeah. Well, anyway, speaking of ideas, let's get to what really matters here. What are your views on therapy, individuation? What do you tell us a bit about your perspective and how it helps people? I mean, you know, I know most of your clients are men, but it's for men and women.
yeah, I definitely men and women. Yeah, most of my clients are men. Well, I mean, use that word individuation. So I'll say, you know, my main influence is Jung.
Mm.
I got into philosophy when I was in high school, like 15, 16. I picked up Nietzsche, got really into it, just felt really important. And, you know, looking back, you know, it's probably not as big a deal as I thought it was at the time, but it's still really cool. And I mean, Nietzsche definitely conveys the impression that ideas really matter. So I just went from there, I just went through philosophy. And then in college, I got into Jung. And probably because of my own, you know, my own emotional issues, whatever I was going through, which is not egregious by any stretch. But I think that's kind of the point is, you know, I don't come from like serious trauma or anything like that, yet I still notice these psychological issues in me. So I got into Jung, and it, you know, it really, a light bulb really went off in my mind about philosophy is great, but philosophy is just our relationship with reality. There's this other aspect to that, which is how do we relate with ourselves so we can relate with reality in a healthier way. And that's really what I got from Jung. And what he says about the individuation process. How do I simplify this? Well, I mean, effectively, he puts it in like a step. Okay, so Jung looked at alchemists, look at medieval alchemists, and he said what these guys were doing, they were not literally trying to turn lead into gold. That's what it looked like on the surface, and that's how they presented their work. Really, what they were doing is they were projecting their psychologies out onto these metals. You know, this field at the time, chemistry, we didn't know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
So it, you know, it's very ripe for our projection. And he says, well, look, these alchemists, they have a pretty methodical way of going about turning lead into gold. So wait, maybe the individuation process, you know, the end result of that, the lapis, the stone, Christ, the self, capital S self,
Mm-hmm.
and put it in a bunch of different ways. The end result of that, maybe we all get to that in the same way. And he kind of put it in this framework of first anamnesis, which is talking about your life, just getting the facts out there, which is absolutely huge. And anybody, like, I'm not one of those guys who thinks everybody needs to go to therapy, but if you haven't talked through your life, just what was going on, simply the facts, even stuff that you don't think is that big of a deal. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I mean, I've been working with people now for, you know, it's been 10 years. And one thing that just never fails to amaze me is how you can have an idea in your mind, you have an issue you're working through, and you're journaling about it, you're doing your introspection work, you know, you're reading all these self-help books about it. And it can all help, you know, it can all help. But until you can really sit down with somebody who has a face and talk with them and look at, just imperceptibly look at the expression on their face as you talk with them, right? Psychic objectivity, you see somebody else seeing you. It completely changes everything. So just that's anamnesis, right? Just getting the facts out. Then there's, you know, emotional regulation, affect regulation, which is just, you know, getting comfortable expressing affect, expressing certain emotions. integration of your opposites. So that could be animus if you're a woman, anima if you're a man. You know, we all know the Myers-Briggs. So if you're like an ENTP, like I would typically. I'm sorry? Are
you talking about me?
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, I don't really. So I would just say NTP because I have the biggest disagreement with the whole introverted extroverted dichotomy. So let's say you're an ENTP. What you do is you integrate your ISFJ, right?
Yeah.
Like that's your point of integration, and then from there you go on to create a self, a capital S self. So what Jung did is he simplified alchemy, and what I claim to do is simplify the emotional regulation and integration of opposites that Jung was doing. Jung's very good. He's this huge brain, but I think he got lost in researching alchemy to really, put the tires to the road, I think is the expression, right? So well, he kind of lost the ability to do that. So what I want to do is I want to be very specific about what that process is. That's all.
Well, towards the end of his life in particular, when he started going down this route, I mean, mainstream psychology shoved him to the side. I think mostly because he scared him a little bit. But, he dove into things that were really beyond even the scientific method, but he stretched the scientific method to its limits to try to explain them. That's why I was always really impressed at the lengths he went through to try to explain this psychic phenomena that was really defied modeling in so many ways, but straining to do it just so that he could prove to people that it existed, even though you couldn't, measure it in a, dealing with stuff like the collective unconscious and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, that was just at the time when psychology was becoming wanted to be more science-based. You know, because that was in the mid 20th century when we had this hangovers from psychoanalytic and everything's about your mother. Psychology is like, whoa. We need to become a science. We're a soft science. Nobody takes us seriously. We need to become a hard science. It's not a hard science. I mean, maybe it will be one day once we get the technology, but it's not a hard science. And that's too bad because that's right when all the stuff that Jung was saying about religion and integrating that with psychology came out, like Answer to Job. That's what really, I mean, I was reading that and, it's like the famously paragraph like 752 or something when he lays out what Answer to Job is about or what Job is about and his answer to Job. Yeah, that was, I think, 1960. And by that, psychology already turned towards like the whole CBT route. That's really has taken over the field right now.
Yeah. Anyway. And that has been ultimately, you would say, I mean, not that there's no benefits maybe to it, but or maybe there isn't, I don't know, but that's where you're kind of going back to the roots and you're taking what was really practical for people and applying that. You think that's like a fair enough summation?
You mean practical people with psychoanalytic work?
Well, so Jung and even Freud, I mean, who gets a lot of crap. I mean, I've given him crap too, because people, the kind of maybe projection or excess fixation on, Oedipus complex, etc. Not that he was wrong that it existed, but the excessive fixation. But I mean, Freud was brilliant, and a lot of the stuff that I mean, we actually take for granted. We're like, oh, Freud, didn't get it. He got this messed up. It's like,
totally. We're all Freudians now.
Yeah, exactly. Like he won the fundamental paradigm. We nitpicked that one thing, but Jung and Freud, and I do think that Jung in the end surpassed Freud, but Jung also built on Freud. So anyway, all this stuff, but the point of it is you're going back in those early days, how they actually helped to solve people's problems by listening to them and drawing out these sort of issues with emotional regulation, the sort of suppressed stuff in the unconscious, it sort of like correcting history when they started to go down the CBT route.
Yeah, it's true. I guess I don't really think of it that way, but yeah, that's what I'm doing. But I would just toot my own horn here. I'd like to think that I add something to what Jung did, which is make that therapeutic process really specific, and that's what I do with my emotional diagrams and everything.
Yeah, it's remarkable what you do in really, what is it, 6 sessions, maybe with like an extra one sometimes.
Yeah, I do a little bit more now, but yeah, I don't want to say like I do a specific number of sessions. What I do say is that our one-on-one sessions together are limited. I want to get you to a very specific place, not where, of course, your issue isn't going to be solved. That can take a while, but I want you to know exactly what your issue is, because I mean, I'm sure you experience this too a lot. Like clients will come to you and they think that the problem is something out there, like to overlap with what you do, like, difficulty getting a girl out on a date.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not the problem. That is a manifestation of a problem. That is a manifestation of a problem that's may have been building up in your life for the past 20 years. And you don't even care about it now because you only care about it now because now you can't get laid.
Yeah.
Like previously you didn't care, but now like the girl's not texting you back and you're freaking out. And you saw her like out at a bar or something with some guy who like was better looking than you, whatever your imagination is telling you. Yeah, so I want to get you very clear about what the fundamental issue is that leads to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty specific process for a lot of people. So what exactly are those steps? And then how do you process that? Which is really just how do you become aware of that? Like what are some tools you can put in your arsenal to become aware of that?
Now, would you say that these sort of, I remember there's that famous Tolstoy quote about how all happy families are happy in the same way and all unhappy families are unhappy differently. Would you say that there is some sort of common root issue that everybody has that just gets expressed in totally different ways? Or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, fundamentally. Exactly. We all have the same issues. I mean, we all have the same emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge, I mean, go back to academia, that's a huge faux pas to say, almost as much of a faux pas as, not decrying feminism, but just like criticizing feminism, right? Like that's it. That's a huge faux pas. But to say that everybody's on some level the same, you can't say that.
Yeah.
Because the implication of saying that is you're not special. And therefore, perhaps by implication, what therapists do isn't that special. But we are the same. I mean, we have different experiences, of course, and the way that our issues manifest are totally different. And part of you working through your issue is, of course, talking about what's going on with you. But the ultimate joke is, what's going on with you is what's going on with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's been going on with people for thousands of years. I mean, I always talk about Philoctetes in the Iliad, right? And he's the guy who's left on the island because he had that infection. And that's, of course, a story about, wounds and overcoming our trauma and how the group of men, right, that they went to go fight in Troy and they went back to that island wherever they left him because they needed his poison arrows. They needed his poison arrows to defeat the Trojans. And of course, it's Philoctetes. I always get that wrong. It was Philoctetes' arrows that actually killed Paris.
Okay.
Was it Paris?
Or
Priam? I don't know. I'm really not a literature expert as I'd like to be. But anyways, that's a story about using these wounds. The community of men need what you've gone through. They desperately need it to defeat the enemy, whatever the enemy is ultimately lies, capital L lies. That's what we need. Like we need you. We need you to talk about it. And so, I mean, that's just an indication we've always been going through this, like you think like you're upset because your girlfriend just broke up with you and nobody will understand how you feel. And you never be able to have the life that you want because your girlfriend broke up with you. No, it's only because she broke up with you. Now you're able to go on and finally do the work that you need to do.
Yeah.
So you can get the life that you need. I know it's frustrating. And I know it's no fun to hear and it's painful. And any words I say to comfort you, I wouldn't want to comfort anybody, first of all, because no, you need your pain. Like that's really healthy. You need to really experience that.
This is one of the things that you've been saying recently, and it's one of those you know, rejoinders or whatever, that is so powerful and disarming. Because even, you know, people talk about tough love, and that's a major thing in our kind of community. Okay, you got to give people tough love. But when you go and you say, trying to empathize with someone, trying to take away someone's pain, try to make someone feel better. And that's probably a better way of saying it rather than empathizing, because that can be separate. You know, you don't have to impede anybody by empathizing, but trying to take away someone's pain, trying to make them feel better, that actually is harming them.
Of course.
It's well, you say of course, but I mean, and it is 100% true.
Yeah.
But how often have you ever heard someone make that, like, that is such a powerful and disarming observation, because we're always so careful about, okay, when is it appropriate to hurt someone, but we're not so careful about when is it appropriate to try to help someone. You know, when is it appropriate to try to make someone even just feel better?
Right. Yeah, so I guess it's not tough love. It's just, I mean, people beat themselves up enough on their own. I don't think you have to be tough with anybody, but it's just about awareness, and that's the idea behind therapy, is just taking these issues that you've gone through, making sense of it, getting really clear about what's going on. I mean, crystal clear, so clear that you can describe it in 10 different ways at a drop of a hat.
Mm-hmm.
And then with that clarity, there really is a lot of pain there. Like, that's all the pain you need. I don't need to tell you to get your life together. I don't give advice. I mean, sometimes, like, if there's, like just some general guidepost to watch out for, I'll tell guys, no, this is actually, based on all my experience, maybe the literature, even, this is actually, not something you should ignore, whatever it is. I gladly offer those kinds of insights. Like big brother, like something your big brother should have told you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have all the pain, you have all the awareness you need, and it's my job to just help you see that, so you can go on and, ultimately make the decisions that you want to make with your life.
Right.
Because without that pain, you're just going to make decisions to avoid that pain.
Right.
And you're going to wonder why your life is self-destructive and going nowhere, or you feel stagnant, even though you're reading all these self-help books and you're watching all these motivational videos. Like, well, why does my life keep going in circles? Because you're trying to avoid the main thing. You're trying to avoid the pain.
Well, yeah, it's all these people, they want to feel better, and so
Right.
they're looking for the way to feel better, but a lot of it is really just avoidance at the end of the day.
And even healthy ways to feel better, like working out, which obviously I think working out's great. I love it. But, a lot of guys working out are working out to avoid that stuff.
Yeah.
And they don't realize it. Like, oh, if I'm ever depressed, I just go on a run. It's like, dude, you're still depressed. You just distracted yourself with endorphins from the run. But that doesn't, you change your mood, but you didn't change the way you can regulate emotion. You didn't really change how you interact with reality in a healthier way, which is ultimately what you need. So.
Okay, so this is a good one, because there's the big meme about, guys will literally go to the gym instead of going to therapy, sort of, that's a common thing that's put out there.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we're both in agreement about the value of therapy, at least with a good practitioner. But is there something to be said for the fact that if you look at it from the standpoint of, okay, you have thought, you have some sort of issue, and it's there's a block, it's energy inside of you, it gets blocked inside of you. Is there something to be said for the fact that men in particular are able to work through emotions through physical activity, or would you say that it doesn't actually, it doesn't deal with it? Like, is there a place, like, if you were to not go to the gym,
Yeah,
and just do therapy, is that really all you need to do, or does the gym play a role that's beyond simply coping? Like, I could drink a bottle of wine instead, be a little less healthy, but.
Yeah. So I guess the analogy here, well, I mean, first of all, I'm super biased because I go to the gym all the time. Like if you watch my YouTube channel for more than 33 seconds, I am just chock full of weightlifting analogies.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think going to the gym is great, but
timeline.
I'm sorry.
You're always posting Arnold on the timeline. You know, the old school bodybuilders.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's all I really want to do with my life is just like rationalize posting pictures of Arnold on Twitter. That's all. It's just what it's really about. But what I like about Arnold is, you know, I mean, what those guys were doing at the time, it was like this weird subculture. It wasn't cool. Nobody was lifting weights, and Arnold was a freak.
Mm-hmm.
Arnold was a freak, and he was an immigrant, and he had this funny accent. I secretly think that he's holding onto his accent just because that's part of his brand. Not a criticism of him, but that's just. And he's just, I'm gonna be ridiculous, and I just love the spirit of that. But anyway. So wait, I'm sorry. What was your? Oh yeah. So I think working out's important. I mean, the analogy, it's not a workout analogy, but neurosis, especially, it's like a straitjacket.
Mm-hmm.
And how guys get out of straitjackets, you know, those escape artists, Houdini, there's just like a little bit of wiggle room. And you wiggle a little bit more and a little bit more, and like you stretch out the fabric, you stretch out the, you know, whatever the straps, and eventually you get out of the straitjacket. What I want to do in therapy is just give you more wiggle room. Mm-hmm. That's what I think SSRIs do very well when people who, I mean, they're definitely overprescribed, but there's people who can really use them and they really help. They just give you more wiggle room.
Yeah.
And going to the gym, it can help give you wiggle room. But no, I don't think it's going to get you out of the straitjacket. I think that ultimately it's going to give you a great foundation. But getting out of the straitjacket ultimately comes through connection, comes through making a genuine connection with real people in real life. And it's my job in therapy to get you to do that. Creating a self so you can make a connection. You know, I'm just saying the same thing, right? But whereas some things like wine, I mean, I'm not a teetotaler. I drink. It's a lot of fun, but that's not wiggling the, you know, that's making you comfortable when you're in the straitjacket.
Right.
Xanax is making you comfortable when you're in the straitjacket. So yeah.
Okay. It maybe stands the reason that a lot of the guys who got this big benefit from it were partly because they became part of the culture there, and that they found maybe community through going regularly and connecting other people who were interested in it, and that
right.
Something, you know, that could have been some aspect of it.
Yeah, you know, we're all on our own path here, and people have different issues they're working with. You know, it's difficult to say, you know, I take issue with guys who say like, hey, I worked through my depression when I was in the gym. I was like eating every day. You know, I was really overweight. I was depressed. Well, dude, if you're eating every day, if you're eating too much, you're not depressed. Because that's the thing with like I mean, there's, you know, what we would call depression in everyday speech, which is just, oh, you feel down in the dumps because your girlfriend just broke up with you. Then there's something called, you know, major depressive disorder, which is different. And just by you saying that you ate a lot and got really fat, like you didn't have depression.
Yeah.
Now you were going through something serious, and the gym helped you with that. I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but now, you know, and then guys go online and like try to give advice on depression because they thought they had depression. When of course real depression is you can't bring yourself to eat. It's painful to eat. It's difficult to move. Yes, you can force yourself to go to the gym, and I'm not saying not to go to the gym if you do have genuine depression, but it's not a long-term strategy.
Yeah. Depression is
or not an ultimate strategy. Yes, I mean going to the gym is great, I think, and you know, sauna, you know, whatever. Take your magnesium. These are all great things, but it's not going to replace, you know, developing a genuine connection with somebody else. As lame as that sounds, but that's ultimately what we're after here. So,
yeah, that's 100%. That's 100% right. You know, guy who's I don't think anybody's going to be convinced by the guy who goes to the gym by himself all the time, and you know that he doesn't talk to anybody, he doesn't connect with anybody, that he's happy, he's having a good time. Like
it depends on the context, right? I mean, the gym for a lot of guys can be avoidance.
Yeah. Yep.
We can use anything for avoidance. It's not about what you do, right? It's how you do it. It's what's the intention. Mm-hmm. That gets into this whole thing about, are you actually increasing pleasure in your life, or are you avoiding pain? And I think a lot of us go around and we can't distinguish between those two.
So let's talk about that. So, I mean, obviously some things are better than others at, you know, relatively speaking as an avoidance mechanism, but what does, God, I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question. I mean, you just want to riff off of it a bit. It's like, because people tend to be motivated to avoid pain more than they are to seek pleasure as a,
Right.
but
Yeah.
do you have to get to a certain level of regulation to where you actively go to seek positive improvements in your life versus simply trying to avoid negative ones? Is it like a necessity that you have to kind of de facto necessity?
Yeah, I think so. I think it takes a lot of work to get to that point. Not a lot of us get there. Not that you can't, of course, use the avoidance of pain as some sort of motivation. I think that's really healthy. But ultimately, what's the intention of a certain action?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just to avoid pain? Because then, if you're, not feeling great, you can, go to the gym and just put yourself in a good mood. But you're not really dealing with issue that you really need to deal with, like, let's say, resentment that you have towards your father or your family, right? So you use that pain that you're in to go to the gym, to get yourself some wiggle room in the straitjacket so you can go on to create better connections with people, ultimately I think your family, but use the connections with the guys at the gym to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's just about the intention behind what you do. But I think, yeah, incorporating that element of, like, yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying, maybe 15 minutes ago, is just getting people to see the pain that they're in, and how if they continue to do what they do, they're just not going to have the life that they want.
Right. There's a certain point where every coping mechanism, even more benevolent ones, kind of run their course, and you just hit a wall with it, and it starts to
Yeah,
either have
definitely.
negative side effects, and that's usually when people change. I mean, at least from my observation with it, it's hard to get them to change before something's run its course.
Yeah, it's got to get painful. And some people just aren't ready to do the work, and that's fine. We're all in that boat. There's some things that I need to change in my life, and I'm just not in enough pain about it to do the work. It's just, so we're all there. Yeah.
Is there, I mean, this is sort of like a stupid question, but I'm just kind of curious on a big picture thing. I mean, obviously in life we want to do as much as we can, try to loosen the straitjacket as much as we can, give ourselves, and that literally means we have more freedom to experience life and to enjoy life.
Yeah.
What does, I mean, do you ever get to a point with these kind of patterns that you actually get out of the straitjacket, you'd say, entirely? Is that a thing, or is it just that you get to a level of freedom from it that you can, move moderately? Or is it the kind of like, if you were to fully escape from it, you would essentially be, you know, like Christ, done with human experience?
Yeah, well, that's what the story of Christ represents, is I think it's just about moving on to the next stage of your development. Like, you sacrifice yourself on the cross, and that's what Jung talks about in Answer to Job, and how sacrificing yourself on the cross is ultimately integration of opposites. But I mean, do you ever get out of the straitjacket? I would say no, because part of the straitjacket, I mean, look, I think free will exists. I know it exists, but the only question is, to what extent does it exist? We don't have total 100% free will. Like, I can't get up on stage and be as funny as Dave Chappelle right now. Right? I don't have the choice to do that. Now, maybe you take somebody with, like, a certain background, maybe a certain temperament, whatever goes into having a sense of humor, then he can get himself to that place with enough development. But no, look, I mean, genetics, it influences our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Our childhood environment influences our behavior. These things are always going to be there. When somebody's gone through, like, serious abuse, I mean, we're talking like sexual, physical abuse, they don't get through that by forgetting about the abuse. They get through that by creating a better relationship through it. or with that abuse. So that stuff is always going to be there, and it's always going to affect us in some way. So I guess in the sense, there's always going to be some kind of straitjacket. But that being said, I think what people can do to, because we throw around numbers, right? And I just tweeted something like this a couple of weeks ago, like what influences your psychological health, and I said whatever genetics was 50%, childhood education was 10%, maybe, I don't know, emotional regulation, that's maybe 30%. But what does that even mean? What does 30% mean?
Yeah.
I think it means a lot more than people typically think it means. They say, it's only 30% of my emotional health, so it's limited. Yeah, it's limited, but I think that most people can improve in ways that they can't even fathom.
Right, and it also precludes the fact that 30% might be the main area that they're missing. That may be the main
cause, yeah.
the main cause of the damage. I mean, some people start out with, it seems like, a better level of emotional regulation than others, and they might go through worse experiences, but because what you would maybe say their genetics, they're able to, not that they don't take any, they don't internalize anything from the experience, but sometimes it can be kind of remarkable how some people can, I don't want to say shrug off, but deal with a lot of that stuff and process a lot of that stuff.
Become better people for it, really.
That's a good way to put it. It's a good way to put it. Whereas other people, and it's not to take away from their experience, but it would be objectively a lot more of a mild thing that sort of creates a cycle, like a neurotic cycle or something like that. Or they were already a bit neurotic by disposition, and that created a harder.
Yeah, like the big five personality, that's, I don't know. I mean, well, I'll just say the only one of those that I think is real, that is genetic, is neuroticism.
I would agree with that.
All the other ones are adaptations, because I don't know. I can point to neuroticism, and you give me an MRI of a brain, I can show you, or fMRI, I can show you what neuroticism is. The other ones, I think they're just adaptations.
So is neuroticism just anxiety?
It is I would say it's your likelihood to become anxious. And I think it has to do with the development between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala, ultimately, or your HPA complex, which you can look at. The other ones, I can't point to agreeableness or openness. I mean, openness may be highly correlated with IQ, which I do think is in part genetic. So,
now, is there a way, without going into pharmacology, to change your neuroticism, or are you always going to have a certain baseline level of it? Like, if you're born with a certain degree of neuroticism, is it just always going to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. I mean, don't take this because nobody can really answer that fully. So just in my opinion, my experience, I think that you're kind of born with this base level of neuroticism because it's adaptive. All neuroticism means is you're just more sensitive to the environment, to what's going on in the environment. So, and especially in populations, let's call them, who have seen a lot of war over the past 1,000 years. You see a lot more neuroticism because it helps to be neurotic when you're constantly in conflict. I mean, in conflict with some neighboring country. I mean, think of the Scottish and English, right? I mean, neuroticism a lot higher in the Scottish for that reason, which partly could explain the alcoholism too.
It's interesting.
But I mean, if somebody wants to be less neurotic, I would say why? Why do you want to be less neurotic? Just manage the neuroticism you have. It's in a sense a great gift. Your sensitivity is a great gift. It's just being in tune, being in touch with what's going on with the environment. And it's not that that's necessarily negative. I mean, commonly in culture, the way we think of it, it maybe has a pejorative context to it, but it's not. It's just how well can you manage it?
So is there some, I mean, I'm kind of taking a leap here, but would you say that there's a connection to sort of spirituality, or like people who are, because you use the term sensitive, and that there's kind of like maybe a heightened perceptiveness, and so people who sort of, because I see a lot of people who have, like, who are highly intuitive, tend to have high levels of neuroticism.
Yeah,
And
I could see that.
so yeah, I don't know if there's some kind of connection with that, and that for them, these people, it's like it's almost like they have a very high sensitivity to energy, to phenomenon. They have to really learn how to regulate and ground it. And I like how that's kind of what you're saying essentially. Yeah, I don't wanna,
Yeah, I guess it depends what you mean by intuition. Do you mean like how Jung describes it in multiple ways, which is just the ability to look past the sense or just like the sense perception of a situation to see what's really going on? Like he summarizes it as be able to tell where somebody has been and where they're going.
yeah, that's a good definition.
Yeah, I think probably people are more intuitive or are more sensitive from that perspective. Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting though. I like how you deconstructed some of the stigma around it to also make it like indicate that there's the positive aspect and the negative aspect of it. In that, so it's not about getting rid of neuroticism. It's about being able to manage and process that sort of heightened sensory input without it rattling you.
Yeah.
More
well,
or
you
less.
know, I'm sensitive, right? I mean, it's not an accident that I got into this field. So it's like maybe I'm just rationalizing. Oh no, this is actually a good thing. Being sensitive is awesome.
Well, you know, but the flip side is that people who aren't, it is actually interesting. I've never thought about it in this way, that people who aren't neurotic tend to heavily discount that sort of phenomena. Like it's almost as if like, well, I don't know what the big deal is. You know, there's kind of like a shrugging off of stuff. And so, you know, they they might not even get into this stuff because they, well, I don't want to say that they don't need it. Maybe there would be help. It would be helpful for them. Actually, I think very often it's to their detriment because they can't even perceive in ways that they're stuck.
Yeah. It's just all about taking whatever you have and use it in the best way. And if you are less neurotic, that would be good for, I don't know, maybe some professions where you just have to like put your head down and grind out work. Yeah, I don't know, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking.
Maybe in war. I don't know. Actually, I don't know about that. I don't know whether it would be good or not. Just spitballing on it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think with most things, there's usually an advantage to something that people see as a detriment.
Yeah.
And it's just about finding whatever that is. There's tons of options. Thankfully, we live in this pretty advanced culture, well, relatively. And there's just lots of avenues for you to do whatever you want. And it's really awesome. But of course, there's a downside to that, too. And people, of course, get anxious about the decisions they have to make when they do have a lot of anxiety. So it's, yeah.
So tacking back to sort of guys today, what do you see going on with most guys that's the cause of their, like when they come to you and they have problems, what are some of the really common patterns that you see?
Well, I'll just say the pattern. I mean, and again, there's lots of ways I could describe it. I'll just describe it in this way. I think the pattern is being more tuned in with other people's feelings than your own. Mm-hmm. Being more tuned in with the outside, with what's going on than being more tuned in with what other people want, but not even what they want, what you perceive they want, as opposed to being in tune with what you want. And I think this leads, I often talk about, we live in the age of attachment disorder.
Yeah.
We live in an age where we cannot make attachments, and anything you see in culture now that seems crazy, or, oh, that doesn't make any sense, or, oh, that's wrong, I could pretty much guarantee you is that it is a result of people not being able to form attachments, which, it is a species expected in us to do. It's like like the child comes out of the womb, it expects to see a mother's face. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't see its mom's face, it is freaking out. But it doesn't just stop in childhood. We all need it and we're all trying to run away from it. And because we don't have that, we just act out in very strange ways that it does make sense. Like there is a rationality to it.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you know, getting involved in, I don't know, like a weird cultish phenomenon going on in culture, or it could, for most guys, just manifest in, you know, what I was saying before, if a girl doesn't text you back and you start freaking out.
Right.
But it's all comes to that same issue. It's like you have emotions. You probably had emotions for years, and you've been totally tuned out. And actually, there was this whole process of development that you needed to go through to manage your emotions. I lay this out, you know, I try to get very specific with it. It's like my own, like Eric Erickson's like adult development kind of thing, or just alt stages of development, or was that childhood development? I should be the one who has that. That was Piaget. That was childhood development. But anyways, it's like first you have to separate from your parents. You have to get comfortable spending time alone, developing interest. You need to be comfortable with friends without bullying people of the same sex or getting bullied by them and being okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
You need to integrate your sexuality. You need to be comfortable with that. And you need to create emotional attachments. And guys don't start to really see a problem until they get to the sex and the emotions. And it's like, oh, I've been missing these stages. You know, I've been, and because I've been missing these stages, I've been more and more tuned out of my emotions. Just didn't realize it until saw my ex-girlfriend, you know, at the bar with that guy.
Right.
Then okay, now I need work. And then like, look, I have a problem with my ex-girlfriend. It's like, no, it's not. I get that that's what it seems like, and we need to talk about that, but that's not the issue.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of social programming and stuff that's aggravated the attachment issues that we have today. And there's also just, you know, or maybe you disagree with that, but
well, what do you mean by social programming? Like,
well, you know, I think that there's a lot of like mass media and telling people like, and there's always been, I feel like people are being, there's kind of like a pulling out of the roots, let's put it that way. So people have, you know, maybe their parents are, there's more divorce, so parents are more split up, and so there's lack of more of a stable foundation.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and then they hear other things that rather than try to correct the imbalance, go and kind of aggravates it further. And then they kind of, there's like these degrees of separation where they'll adopt a new identity and then a new identity. And then it's like, well, why am I not happy today? Why am I so upset and feel bad? And these kind of core needs from the very beginning weren't met, but there's all these sort of layered reasons on top of it that don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely is a social programming. I don't think by intent, but I think it's just like a lot of, you know, ever since modern philosophy, I mean, right? That was the huge shift in the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. Mostly the Enlightenment is, you know, like Francis Bacon, like we have a mind, there's a reality out there, and we can use our minds to understand reality. And then the whole shift with modern philosophy, starting really with like, you know, Kant, I would say, is no, that's not true. We don't really know what reality is. What you perceive to be reality is just it's just because of like the workings, like the subjective workings of your mind. You don't really know what reality is. And this usurped, it totally, I think, short-circuited our brain in the Western world. Are you smiling?
I'm just thinking about imagining having a conversation with Kant. You know, how annoying it might have been at times. You know, he just, no, that's not true. That's not true. You know, I could just imagine there'd be a lot.
Well, that's the problem with subjectivism, right? It's
how do you know?
Yeah, how do you know that what you're saying is true? And he would I don't know, he would probably say you can't really tell, but it doesn't matter anyways. Because there's really no room for art, you know, this whole enlightenment shift and where we can grasp reality, it doesn't matter anyway. And what we have now in philosophy, I mean, that was my major in undergrad. uh, what we have now in philosophy, and philosophy professors will admit this. They will admit this openly. It is disconnected from reality. Like if you ask, like, yeah, so how can I like apply this to my own life, or this? How does this apply to ethics? And how can I use this, or like in politics? How does this apply? No, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
We don't do that. But what we did have in Western culture, I think what you're getting at is these traditions that help ground us. And, you know, for whatever fault that there may have been in these traditions, they at least kept us connected in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But we got rid of that. And which isn't bad, I think, but we didn't replace it with anything else. We didn't have any better ideas.
Right.
But part of the problem is when the reason we got rid of all those traditions is we didn't have the intellectual foundation to defend them. Mm-hmm. We're just, oh, well, they're just traditions and we do this because we've been doing it. Well, you're not going to hold on to a tradition that way. If somebody comes in and right. you know, throws over your society, throws over these traditions, it's not their fault for overthrowing their tradition. It's your fault because you couldn't defend it intellectually. And, you know, I mean, when I was in 8th grade, you know, I was going to get confirmed in the church. I went in and I said, look, I don't believe in God. I don't think I'm going to be confirmed. And the minister, his you know, and he's a pretty liberal guy, so it could have been a lot worse. But his response was like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand where you're coming from. And he like, there's no defense of it. I said, you know, if I was born in a Jewish family, then I would just be a Jew.
Yeah.
So how does that make sense for me to join this church? And he's like, yeah, that's a good point. But that's what Jung did. You know, Jung went back and said, yeah, there actually is a point to these things.
Right.
Now, and that's of course his point in Job. Like his point in Job is that the question isn't whether God exists. Of course God exists. The question is, what is God?
Right.
How do we develop a healthier relationship with this thing that's going to exist no matter what, whether it's a Christian God or you go to university and the God becomes the tribe, the group, the collective, the race, society, government. Mm-hmm. There's going to be something. So how do we create a healthy, like a healthier relationship with a God that, you know, doesn't ask us to sacrifice so much, or when he asks us to sacrifice, it's really about, you know, integrating our opposite, our inferior functions, you know, something like that, so we can become a capital S self and go on to have our own, from that, go on to have our, you know, our own religious experience. I mean, that's the ultimate religious experience, is your experience with yourself, like develop a self, develop an identity. Have dreams, do active imaginations. Tell us what you see. What do you see when you develop a self? You know, how does the collective unconscious present to you? Talk to us about it. Let's connect over it. You know, let's build temples to it. That's what it is. But we just lost, I mean, like any sort of you know, tradition or, you know, Christian values that we had, like they just lacked. They're just totally bloodless. Yeah. Absolutely bloodless by the end of the 19th century. And we got rid of them. Because this thing called German philosophy came in from the continent, right? Continental philosophy, and it took us out. And now we have, you know, like CRT and crazy Marxist stuff now. And it's like, oh, it's just happened in the past 10 years or 15 years, you know, it's like since 2011. Like, no, that's just, yeah, that's just the end result. Like there's been a lot going on.
Young were talking about it even in the, you know, in the early 1900s, late 1800s. They were,
oh yeah,
saying like this is coming.
Oh, the prescience of those guys is insane, and Dostoevsky too. I mean, yeah. It's I'm actually rereading Brothers Karamazov, and it's just, yeah, these guys with their brains, it's incredible.
But you know, it's an interesting way to look at it, and it actually helps you to take a step back and view the current situation with all of its problems, but to still understand that there are a lot of benefits in it. That, okay, so we had these traditions that provided a lot of value, but we didn't even understand why they provided value. And so we went through this process of deconstructing them and eventually leaving them. And now we're sort of in the desert without anything to hold our hand, you know, to ground us. And so what we're seeing now is a return, but I think in the end, it's going to be a return, like it's there are some people who just want to go back, and that's not going to happen, and that's not supposed to happen.
You wouldn't want it to happen if it
You wouldn't
did.
want it to happen, right? That's a
It's
kind
a
of
fantasy.
avoidance. Like, it's a fantasy. Exactly.
Of course. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm just going to stay out and, not interact with the rest of the world, and, grow, not, whatever.
Yeah, that was like my fantasy when I was 22. I mean, that's like the monk mode, serious young man thing.
Yeah,
Like, and that's a healthy stage to go through, but you got to keep going.
Yeah. But we come back and we have this sort of, we create new initiations. We pull out all this stuff from our tradition, from our lineage, but we ground it in sort of who we are now. It's like it's an integration. It's like a hero's journey for Western civilization in some sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of, like, integrating this stuff from the past, but
Yeah.
in your own way, like giving it your own expression. Yeah, I think that's what we need. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now it's ours. It's not something that we were just, well, you do it because you're supposed to do it. Like, you come to it on your own. And so it'll probably have a variation of flavors, but I think that's coming. I mean, maybe it is going to take a decade, but we're gonna, like, there's going to be some rough stuff.
A decade?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a process. It's not a single moment. But what I mean is that my sort of perception of where the collective unconsciousness is at, and I'm curious what you think, but I think that we're kind of even past the nadir with this stuff. Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that on the surface there's stuff that's still, but people are already trying to think like, okay, we're uprooted. Like, we need to find some way to reground, and what can we pull out? What can we do? Because all these people are trying to heal, and part of the process of that is we are having to do sort of what Jung did, and, like, reach back, and where was some of this, where did this stuff come from in our culture? What was the value of it? And what emerges is going to be really interesting to see, but it's still in this chrysalis process. But I think that the deconstruction period is, I mean, we're going to still be going through the after effects of it, but I think it's kind of run its course finally. That's my perspective. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's difficult to say because there's just multiple veins, multiple cultures going on in what we call Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from that perspective, we've already won in a sense, because there's already, great intellectual movements in Western civilization. I mean, it's not the mainstream. You're not going to turn on CNN and hear about it, but these things are going on, and there's a lot of smart guys out there doing work that they need to do. Like I always get a little annoyed when people liken our collapse with the collapse of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It's like we just have totally different intellectual influences. I mean, we are way more. They didn't know who Aristotle was. I mean, they kind of knew, but just stuff like that, just as an example, which like we have way better ideas than they had at the collapse of Rome. So I'm not too worried about. It doesn't mean that whatever was going on, like inflation can't take us out, or whatever. Like I
well,
but I'm thinking long term, it's already on the ascent.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I completely agree. And I think one of the big differences is that everybody was so much, I'm not saying that like trying to make them into being stupid, which is what a lot of people do. They'll look back at people from prior eras like, oh, they don't understand anything. Like, I think that they did understand quite a bit, but society as a whole was extremely unconscious. I mean, extremely, extremely unconscious. And so how it looks to me, these sort of cycles are just, the natural kind of cycle of, like, it's an unconscious cycle. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, but there's no realization of it. Then there's, the progress is very minimal as you go through these civilizational cycles. And then I think now we're starting to hit escape velocity, or we have hit escape velocity, in that the awareness, the consciousness of the planet has been going forward. But to a lot of people, it seems like regression, because we've been leaving some of the fundamentals behind in the ascent upward. And there is going to be some little, drop down. But when it does, it's not like a collapse. It's more of just, oh yeah, now we have to bring this stuff back in, and now we're really, I don't know, I don't want to, like, human nature is human nature, but there's something really interesting about consciousness to me, and I'm actually, I think it's a good segue. I mean, are you familiar with like Dr. David Hawkins and his sort of assessments of levels of consciousness?
No, I've never heard of that. Maybe I have, I just don't recognize the name.
So the seminal book was Power versus Force, and this is kind of like a, it's pseudoscientific, right? Um, he's although he's a PhD, I think he was a PhD in psychology, and he went towards like the spiritual route. And there's a lot of interesting observations he has in terms of these sort of tiers of consciousness, and he also gets into nonlinear dynamics and kind of makes claims that you can measure it. But what I think might be really interesting in terms of, like, I noticed a really substantial overlap with it with your work. So you have on consciousness, you have sort of, let's say, low consciousness. And lower consciousness is this range going on the very bottom level to shame, like suicidal, depressive stuff. You're just, like you said, like when you're in that real depression, you're adjacent to death, really. I mean, you're the life force is essentially, and I think you can even measure people energy move. There's have like those sort of devices that you can sort of see what parts of the body are activated. And in depression, it's like there's no energy like anywhere in the body, pretty much.
Yeah, when you're depressed, a lot of your actions, whatever actions you do have, it's like a pseudo suicide.
Yeah,
It's like you want to die, but you're just not quite there yet.
pretty
Yeah.
much. And so you have shame, guilt, and then it moves up to stuff like desire, where you're like wanting, and you have to be precise with the terminology, but this is where it would be like externalizing lust onto someone else, like someone else can give you, and then it goes to anger. And one of the things that was really interesting about that is how, some of the stuff that we talked about, I know when we were working together, about how anger isn't necessarily a bad emotion, right?
Right.
And Dr. Hawking says the same kind of thing, that anger from this relative perspective is actually like a level of agency taking. It's
Right.
a movement away from being the sort of passive victim. And then it goes from there to pride, and pride is, feeling really, really full of yourself. It's kind of like the top of the bottom, basically. But it's still very fragile because it's sort of maintained on you having that position. Breaking out of this lower consciousness thing. And again, he claims that the energy, that nonlinear dynamics and everything, that actually you can measure different configurations, but when it moves from there to courage, they says that's the line of integrity, because that's when people move into courage, and that's like when they're afraid but they move forward anyway. It's kind of like taking that vulnerable step, like, I know I have a problem, I'm going to acknowledge it and go get help even though I'm like scared. And that now you're in this whole new realm, and then it moves through various terms they call neutrality, willingness, which is basically gradual ways of accepting, and eventually get more optimistic, right? And then at the top of that tier, you have rationality, which is basically reason, which is basically, the real objective understanding of how everything works and how everything's connected, and not taking it personally. And then there's the next tier, and that's where things start to get really wonky, where you get into love and joy, which is very much at this point no longer even engaging in, less and less engaging in duality. Like, so understanding that you and that other person are connected, and feeling connected to them regardless of what kind of actions and stuff. Just it goes to bliss state, and he puts Christ at the, as at the top of it, like in other avatars, etc., as 1,000, and beyond that the scale is essentially non-existent. But he goes and he has this whole thing with muscle testing. I mean, he's passed away now, but he passed away, like, I think in 2014. But with all the muscle testing stuff, and it's similar to other things like with pendulum work or whatever. But basically, if you can ask questions, if you calibrate things correctly, you can say, okay, what's my name? Where was I born? And your muscle will respond strong if it's true and weak if it's false. And so anyway, that's part of how you even get into these sort of numbers. And most of the population is beneath the line of integrity, and very few of the population are in love or higher. I think when he did it, it was something like 5% of the world population, as you could say, is in that state, and only like 22% or something like that was in what we could call this courage to reason above the line of integrity. But they emit more energy, they make a bigger impact on the surroundings of society, and so they're sort of more dynamic. And I think it's really it's interesting. It's anyway, but
Well, I'm just not sure about, I mean, shame, that's the lowest one. But if you're going through like a new phase in your life, you may feel some shame. You may be brought back down to the level. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing, or maybe I'm just not understanding it.
I think it's more that it's not the emotion itself, it's not the experience of the emotion, because there can even be there's positive elements to any emotion in a context, right? It's more like living in a state of shame. So like internalized shame, if that defines you, having this kind of internalized shame, the more shame that you carry within you, just for that's going to lower you down and might draw people into your, and I'm now extrapolating, but that would draw people into your life that are going to feed off of that shame, which is how you can maybe have some nasty relationships and whatnot.
Yeah. Why does every girl I attract borderline? Girls are crazy. I don't. It's just modern women. Like, is that what's going on here?
Well,
that kind of thing.
Let's talk about borderline, because the Amber Heard trial came on and everything, and she's got a couple of the cluster Bs to her name, but at least that's what.
Does she officially? I mean, did that come out?
I think that the psychologist there, I think, said that she had histrionic and borderline. But
she's an actress. I mean, I actually just did a video last week about why actors are so unstable, and I just think it's. I'm sorry. Continue. Yeah.
No. I mean, but what I'm curious about this is it's. I don't want to say so. It happens to every guy, obviously, but there is like borderline personality disorder is really fascinating for guys to deal with. I think that's a way to put it.
Yeah, that's our own initiation, is getting a borderline girlfriend.
No,
dating her.
But it actually, like, unironically kind of is. Like, so many guys.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not. Yeah.
So what is
getting broken up with by a girlfriend is the best thing, is the closest thing we have right now to initiation.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, it's not good or bad. It's just what we're dealing with. It's just what we have in our culture that gets us to feel what we need to feel to learn and grow. But yeah.
So what is it about borderline girls? I mean, obviously the sex is usually pretty great, but what is it about them? I mean, is this an anima thing? Like, can you talk about that? Yeah. And maybe is there a connection to the anima?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Well, they present as just very like emotional. Let's just say emotional. I don't want to get too lost in the terminology, because not everybody has annotated Jung like I have. If you want the annotations to Jung, go to my website. They're on there for free. It's guys who are tuned out of their emotions. And so this girl comes into their life, and she is emotionally very present. Mm-hmm. And there is a huge benefit to that. It's nurturing. It just feels so good. It gets all the chemicals going, and it's a great experience. But the downside to that is, of course, she has no boundary, which is ultimately what borderline is. I mean, borderline is just an egregious form of narcissism, I would say, which is no identity. I mean, that's what children are. Children are narcissists. They're borderline. They don't have an identity. They need you for, psychological fuel, which is right when you're a child. But if you don't grow out of that, if you haven't had enough contact with reality, or been told no enough, or been rejected enough, And a lot of 20-year-old women or 22-year-old women who are, tend to be attractive, they haven't been. Then yeah, there's going to be this really nurturing emotional experience in your life. But if you don't have the stability as a man to manage that, first of all, if you had any stability as a man, after 3 lines talking to this girl at the bar, whatever you met her, you go, oh, this is like, she's kind of interesting, but you can tell this is crazy. Like, you just know.
Yeah.
That's why I was got to make fun of the guys who always end up with the borderline or narcissistic girl. It's like, dude, you're tuned out.
Yeah.
The reason is you're tuned out. So you're like this dry sponge going out to the bar, and just a little bit of water gets poured in, you just suck it up, and you just can't get enough of it. And so yeah, they're tuned out. They're not good at making their own decisions. They don't have much of an identity, and they get sucked in. And it feels good at first, but after a while, it's obviously she. I heard that Amber Heard took a dump on Johnny Depp's bed. Is that true? Or, I mean, can they really test that? I mean, I don't know. It seems like conjecture, maybe.
I think that there was some proof of it. I think maybe he had video or something like that.
Okay, well, yeah, stuff like that happens. And honestly, like I've worked in some interesting places, worked with people, and that's like not even that. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But like what people do, how people like really when they feel hurt, and it's like you have been hurt. Not by this person so much, but you have been hurt, but you're reacting like they're the one who hurt you. And it just gets dark and primal and mean. And it's like, is she a bad person for doing that? I mean, that's kind of the question. It's like, I don't, I come from the psychological aspect, but I would say, no, I just say, she has emotional issues that she doesn't know how to handle. And that's her way of doing it, allegedly, whether she did poop on his bed.
So,
but I mean, the thing is I'm not saying this is Johnny Depp, but guys would happily have a girl poop on their bed if it meant she validates you in the way that you cannot perceive that you can validate yourself on your own. Like a girl taking a dump on your bed, that is nothing, so. Well, it always goes both ways.
Girl take a dump on their chest. I mean, they wouldn't even care. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's happened. I've heard of that happening, so I'm sure it's happened. I mean, but I think if you want a girl to take a dump on your chest, that's I would imagine,
Is that in your fetish category? Does that go down to the side that maybe you want to work on? Is that? I saw your fetish video.
Oh, you saw that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what was the 2x2? It's like, yeah, an unhealthy fetish.
Joy, shame, which again goes with the consciousness thing, right? Interestingly, but
joy. Joy. Like, does the fetish bring you joy, or does it activate shame? Yeah, that's probably what I was saying. And a lot of people, if you're at that, I guess, lower stage of consciousness, you cannot disassociate shame from sexuality.
Yeah.
And so, like, you need to feel shame in order to, I mean, just in Western culture, it's not just Western culture, but we just have yet to come to term with our sexuality. I mean, you talked about Freud. I think that's the huge benefit that he added to Western culture is actually sexuality is important. It kind of matters. It's not everything, but it is important, and we do need to integrate it in some way. And when people don't, then they can really only experience it through shame. So, yeah.
Okay, this is.
Did we get off track there?
No. We did. There was other stuff, and I'm going to return to it. This is just really, really important.
Yeah.
This sexuality and shame versus, because you have this, with porn and people having this sort of porn addictions or I don't know, maybe addiction is strong, but compulsions at least, let's say. Yeah. And there's, and obviously a lot of the material, it's not necessarily vanilla. It's not your grandpa's porn, let's put it that way. It's not like a nudie magazine. It can get a little bit out there.
Yeah, my most popular video is one I did on incest porn.
Yeah.
It's like it's not a small thing, yeah, but anyway.
So I think I saw that one too. It was a really good video. So there's the question here though is this lust versus love dynamic with sex. And I think this is an argument that has existed for a long period of time, and I think it gets into stuff with Madonna whore archetypes, and it gets into sort of more the sort of conservative attempt to sort of put sex into this very holy container, which at its extreme means only for procreation and nothing else, and then goes into the other at its extreme, right? And then it goes to the other end where it's like sex is all about degradation, and it's kind of like a lot of trauma acting out. And so I'm curious on both a clinical and sort of like a your personal opinion on this. Where does like is it, do you want to be getting rid of shame-based impulses with sex? Like I know a lot of people have them. Is that something that you want to try to move away from so that you're only engaging in sex from like a pure kind of open heart kind of connection? Or is there negatives from continuing to act out things that provoke shame? Because, you know, a lot of the argument here is, well, if it's between two consenting adults and one wants to shit on the other one's chest, you know, and they just do that, like, is there anything wrong with it? And I actually find like it's a difficult argument to answer, right? If you're in a committed relationship and one person doesn't care about, is okay with doing that, is that a bad thing to do? But then the flip side is like, is that really connection, or what is going on here exactly? Is this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, if it's between two consenting adults, I wouldn't want to outlaw it or anything.
Not talking about outline. I'm
yeah.
just, is it healthy?
Yeah.
Let me put it that way. Is it healthy? Is it facilitating development, or do you want to move through some of those things?
So now I'm trying to think of a scenario in which having your wife or husband shit on your chest would be healthy. Well, look, here's the thing. I don't want to speak to it like it's like generally. I just if you have some fetish that you're concerned about, then I would ask you to go talk with a therapist about it and really try to distinguish between, is this in truth increasing pleasure, or is this decreasing pain? Is this acting out maybe some trauma that you went through? Obviously, maybe not somebody crapping on your chest, but something that reminds you, right? Like somebody crapping on your chest, that is like, let's take from Jungian, that's like symbolically, that says something.
Yeah.
In fact, he has this great dream in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, about like the crap falling on the steeple. I mean, that was a big deal for him. So I think you're acting out something here that may mean something about you. And so it's just, let's go in at the very least, talk about it, talk about where this could be coming from, talk with your spouse or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever about it. Just to, again, go back to the straitjacket, just to give yourself some breathing room. And then typically in those kinds of situations, I mean, I haven't dealt with, Cleveland Steamer, it's called, right?
Yeah.
I haven't dealt with a Cleveland Steamer personally, but I have dealt, with just like fetishes, and like usually like just the intensity around the fetish goes away. Maybe they still use it, but they don't need it anymore. It becomes maybe a fun thing that you can incorporate into the bedroom, but now it's about increasing intimacy as opposed to just being a cover for emotional intimacy. So yeah, that's.
So this is okay. So this is good. So it's when people use the shame as the only vector for them to be able to experience any kind of intimacy, that's when it's a problem, rather than to take something that might be, degrading on the surface, but is really just, hey, well, maybe this will be interesting, or maybe this will, add a, I don't want to hesitate to use the word flavor, but to the mix. That's
yeah. I mean, typically when people do like to be abused in the bedroom, I mean, we're talking about real abuse, not like rough sex with the,
sure,
with a girl. I mean, obviously something else.
Yeah.
When they really like abuse in the bedroom, it's usually reenactment of trauma, sexual trauma, just as you would assume. And it's like, let's just not reenact this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but let's take all the pressure away from what this means so you can look at it more objectively. And then if you still like maybe some rough sex, is it going to be perfect? Is it, you know, totally pure emotional, you know, a connection between you and the guy or the girl you're having sex with? It's like, well, no, probably not. But I don't know. We all have something.
Mm-hmm.
We all have something. That's why I kind of, you know, when you said, is there any way to get out of the straitjacket? I just want to say no. You know, just because there's no endpoint to this stuff. There's always more work to do. Doesn't mean you're bad, right? It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. But usually when you're at the place where you're like, well, I got all my psychological issues figured out, there's usually a next stage there that you're not aware of.
Right.
You know?
You haven't hit that new wall yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and would you also say that being with somebody who is, you know, you're committed to, there's a lot of trust there, that that one of the ways that you could move through shame is to actually go through a reenactment of it or to experience it in a controlled way to be able to deconstruct it? Do you think that that's something that works?
I think it would depend on the situation. I don't know.
Okay.
Look, you know, I come from the idea of as long as you're trying to do something, as long as you're like trying to work through intimacy issues, then whatever. If it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. You're not gonna, you know, regress back to, you know, whatever age you were when you were sexually traumatized. It just didn't work, and then you know, try something else.
Okay. So speaking back to, you know, the age you were traumatized. So we were taught, you mentioned borderline narcissism, that these are things, basically are they all these sort of cluster B in, you know, personality disorders? Are they basically like childhood regressions, like, or like trapped in childhood, like never progressed past a certain stage?
Exactly. I mean, that's how I conceptualize it the most. Yeah. It's you really don't have much of an identity, and you know, that's what people get wrong about narcissism all the time, is they think, oh, you just have a big ego.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the opposite. Well, there's a lot of confusion about the term ego in our culture. Like a lot of the times when the way it's used is as a synonym for insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Like the guy's a big ego typically means he's insecure.
Right.
But, you know, in psychoanalytic terms, having an ego is a healthy thing. No, you need a big ego. You need a strong ego. That is the focal point for your consciousness. By consciousness, I mean both your conscious and your unconscious.
Right.
Like that is how you interact with the world. No, you need a strong ego. But narcissists don't have that. And what they do is they'll act in a way that makes it seem like they have a strong ego. So they need attention on themselves. They're all, you know, like histrionic, similar, like you're constantly creating drama and attention as a distraction from the fact that essentially you are a child in an adult's body.
Yeah.
And I think with actors, I've worked with a few. I mean, I went to grad school, well, initially in New York, so there are always actors there. And yeah, I mean, that's the pattern, exactly what you would expect. I mean, these are people who typically they develop a sense of self by getting validation from performing. And, you know, performing in a certain context is really healthy, but ultimately what, you know, connection is what we're all looking for. It's the opposite of a performance. It's a genuine connection. So when it comes to a relationship, like you're just stuck in performance mode emotionally. You're just going after the validation. You can't not do it because that's all you've known since you were 8, and, you know, putting on shows or whatever after dinner for your parents. And you got more attention. You got more positive attention from your parents when you put on these shows after dinner than you did when you got the A on the spelling test.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, that's just been ingrained in you. Is there any way that you can overcome that? It's tough. You know, it depends on neuroticism, for instance. It depends on, it's temperament, other aspects of your childhood development. So it it just makes creating a healthy relationship with somebody, it's just very difficult. No, that's not all actors. It's a generalization, but generalizations are true generally. That's why we have them. So
now, a tough question is, do you feel like people with these kind of personality disorders, I'm not, obviously there's always exceptions, but do you feel like generally they can overcome them? Or is it more that there's just some level of triaging?
Well, I don't know. That's a tough question. I would say there are things that you can do. Like I have seen people go through stuff that would make your face melt. It was so awful. You couldn't believe. And they've no, I mean, I'm pausing there, right? Because I don't want to say the answer. The answer is you can't overcome it, but you can manage it.
Yeah.
And the way they manage it is maybe through medication, maybe through going to a group, like being in therapy every day for the rest of your, like if you're a diabetic, you take insulin every day, and it's no different, right? You just, like, this is what you need. This is your medicine. And if you miss a week of this group, of this, whatever, like drug addict recovery group, whatever it is, and you start to act in crazy ways, well, what if a diabetic started taking or stopped taking the medication for a week? It's like, oh yeah, we got to cut your foot off, right? I mean, would you be surprised if that was the result? No. Does that mean the diabetic can't live a good life and create healthy relationships? Does that mean that they're a bad person in any way? Of course not. So, I guess when you say overcome, no, ultimately, I don't know. I mean, there's some, I think drugs are great in a certain context. And there's been some good stuff about ibogaine. I mean, not a lot of good research yet. I mean, there hasn't been enough research to really say. But ibogaine, this drug that's not legal in America, but I think it is in Mexico and in some other countries, that can really help people process trauma. And I don't know. I can't say enough about that. I haven't tried it. It sounds interesting. So maybe something like that.
What is it based on? What kind of circuitry?
I do not know enough about it. I saw a documentary about it. The guy who made the documentary Bigger, Stronger, Faster? This is about steroid use in professional sports.
Okay.
Chris Bell.
Yeah, okay. That name's
Chris Bell. I guess he has he was a drug addict for a while. He had some alcoholism issues, and he used ibogaine. The documentary is on YouTube. I think it's still on YouTube. It's free. It's called ibogaines. This is funny. It's just like total meathead. It's like perfect. For me, like total meathead lingo. And he talks about it. I don't know much about it, but there isn't that much literature on it, so I can't say for sure. But that doesn't mean that it just doesn't mean it's not helpful. It's just we don't know enough to say.
Okay. Now, borderline is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like 90% women. It's diagnosed and something like that.
Something like that. I would imagine.
And of the men, I mean, I'm being somewhat speculative here, but they're often gay, right? Is it more of a, like, I've always looked at borderline as this sort of feral femininity.
Yeah.
So what is the analog to that for masculinity? What is a personality disorder that men tend to have in predominant amounts? Is it like psychopathy?
Yeah, it would be. I think the analog to that would be schizoid.
Schizoid, okay.
Yeah, just
which is different
tuned out, isolated, can't relate, comes off as autistic, but he's not. Like, I think we all feel like, I'm sure you've had like a marathon work session. You've been staring at a computer screen for 10 hours. Then you leave and then you talk to somebody, like somebody at the coffee shop, and they say hi, and it's just kind of jarring to you. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And that's probably something like that. I mean, that's would be a mild form of it. Not a form of it, just maybe some experience of what it could be.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's why we have, the schizoid, not officially, but schizoid tuned out guy.
Yeah.
Pairing off with the borderline girl, because they need each other.
Right.
Right. I mean, don't you see how the girl who has an eating disorder is just perfect for the guy who, spent his formative years playing World of Warcraft. Of course. and by the way, get in that relationship. God bless.
Yeah.
This is going to be part of your growth and development, because I can, as a therapist, like I can guide you and show you what's going on, but you got to be out there having these experiences and, really getting these situations where you can feel the emotions and feel what's going on, really feel what it's like to not have much of an identity, feel what it's like to still be emotionally attached to your mom and dad,
Mm-hmm.
and then have a girlfriend, because I can't, no amount of words I can put together is going to tell you how terrible of an idea that is, or how terribly that's going to work out for you. But you gotta feel, you gotta experience it. Yeah, go through that initiation.
And look, without casting any aspersions, but I've seen this very heavily with my clientele, but guys who come from cultures where the family, it's like always like arranged marriages, and when the mother lives with, it's common in Indian culture, it's not exclusively there. Super brutal for their relationships in the modern age, because there's like I've even just outside of clientele, I mean, I've heard these stories where it's like the mother lives with the the couple, but in that dynamic, the mother is above the wife, and the son's attached to the mother. So it's like this, you just see it keep going down generation after generation.
What you think that's any different in Western culture, just because we don't have the mother living with the wife, the fiance? I mean, the mother's still there
Yeah.
psychologically. The boy is still attached to the mother. Oh, well, I moved out when I was 18 and I'm not attached. No, like, I go back on Thanksgiving. No, I separated from my parents. No, it's not a physical separation.
Yeah.
When you're with your mom, you bend over backwards to make her happy, to do whatever you can to not make her upset so she doesn't cry, she doesn't get any bit hysterical or anxious. It's like you're not really connecting with your mom, right? You're connecting with this idea of, I want to be there with my mom for Thanksgiving, but also I don't want to make her upset or make her anxious or do anything to make her cry. Well, guess what? When you get married and have a wife, your mom's still going to be there. At least I think it's more honest in Indian culture. Like, yeah, we know the guy's still attached to the mom, so that's why we're going to have her. So it's not just symbolic. It's real.
Yeah.
And same thing with your dad. Yeah. So I don't think it's any different, honestly.
So how do you advise guys to put up boundaries around their mom? With a father, it's kind of more, I think, clear in the sense that, okay, maybe you have to have some sort of reconciliation with the father, and you talk to him, and maybe you talk about the disconnect, or it there's something very rite of passage about it, like you and him now are on equals, or maybe even you're the one who takes the mantle now. But with a mother, especially if she's more of like a hysterical mother, how is the guy how do you recommend the guy go and deal with that? Because a conversation like between two men, like maybe the dad's not super open emotionally, but it's like you can kind of do this thing with the mom. She's like, how would you recommend it?
Well, it depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to say. Okay, I guess I'll say generally, because I don't want to. I'll say generally, what you do is two things. You make a list of things that you don't want to talk about in front of your mom. And then at the same time, you increase FaceTime with your mom.
Mm.
So whatever, like if your mom doesn't, lives in a different city, you can call her on the phone. That's fine. And you just do those two things. Now, I'm not saying you take the list of what you're not talking about with your mom and you go talk to her about it. I'm not saying that. You're not going to do that. That's too much. It's overwhelming. But you just make the list so you're aware. So you're more aware. You look at the list. It doesn't feel good. Mental health isn't about feeling good. It's about getting in touch with reality. And in order to do that, we got to get in touch with you. And if there's some things that you're not saying to your mom that's painful to even write down for you to look at it, in the comfort of whatever your home, like you're writing stuff down and looking over your shoulder to make sure nobody's looking in on you, like that's you. That's your relationship with yourself. So you do that, and you increase FaceTime with your mom and just see what happens.
Mm-hmm. So if your mom does like emotional dumping on you, and that's one of the things, like it's one thing if the guy is, I know you're talking about something different, like things that you want to say to her about how you feel without going and doing that. But if a lot of guys, what I see is that when they have a connected relationship with their mom, they're sharing all sorts of things about their life with her, and maybe it's like every day, call my mom, tell her about my day, kind of stuff. Like it's maybe and so that's obviously something, but he can dial that back himself, and he can, not put those emotions onto her. Mothers will, even if they don't need it, will rarely, turn down their child who's looking for emotional availability. So that's very much okay. That's your own agency. You can take care of it. But in the case where it's the mother who's trying to go contact him and try to talk about her problems, do you have any strategies that you recommend for guys to handle that without, I know it's not always clean, but without having everything go excessively dramatic, put it that way?
Well, first I want to say, I mean, you kind of assume that the mom's always going to be there to hear you emotionally dump.
Yeah.
That is not my experience in working with people. I mean, that's the narcissistic mother, right? Is she doesn't have emotional space for you. I mean, she'll pretend like she does.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll have the trappings of somebody who's a good listener, but she's not listening, right? She's just waiting her turn. And if you're an adult, it's not a big deal. But when you're 9, what 9-year-olds unconsciously do is they go, okay, I need to exist to make mommy happy. So I'm not going to be, right, that's being tuned out of yourself, being more tuned with other people. Then that's when you get like more of the schizoid thing. And then the borderline girl comes and she's great, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that's not necessarily true. The other, so what do you do when your mom's dumping without it turning into a mess? You don't know, it's going to turn into a mess. It's going to be bad. But if you're not ready for that, then go to therapy, work on what you do to avoid discomfort in conversations. Work on your own, because there's a pattern there, and it's egregious with your mom, but it's there with everybody. It's probably there with, the mailman. I mean, who knows, right? This thing comes up in so many different ways. So let's get really clear about what the pattern is, really clear about what it means for you when you hide who you are for the sake of appeasing what you project to be somebody else's feelings, right? You don't know. It's all in your mind. You don't know. So how are you hiding who you are? How are you disconnecting from yourself for the sake of what you think is this relationship? It's not a relationship.
Right.
Get really clear about that, really clear about how that feels. Work through it in ways you are able to work through it. Come to a group. I have a group for men and women where it's like just stepping stones to the real world. Like it's practice talking. So it's easier when you go out and talk with your mom. And when she cries and says, how could you do this to me? How could you make me feel this way? Oh, that's terrible. And when she goes through her whole thing, you're probably still going to be connected to it to some degree, but you're just going to be more disconnected, more able to see. And that's part of the work you need to do. It's either that or, be in the borderline schizoid or borderline, beta codependent guy dynamic. Right. There's no other way out of this.
Yeah, it's interesting how the guys who have poor boundaries with women either become like the quintessential beta, or they become like seducer kind of playboy people. It's like they're emotionally it's not that surprising, right? But
it's hiding either way.
Yeah, it's hiding either way. And
like you just now are hiding in an extroverted way by like talking to girls and running lines. And that's the thing I say. I mean, like there's a lot of advice out there. Like, I know you don't, I know you're like really ethical and like do good work with guys, but there's just a lot of like pickup stuff that you can use and guys will use to perform, and it works.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is it works. and,
Yeah.
so you're really never going to, you got to get to a point where I think you got to be desperate to do the work that you need to do.
For those initial stages, at least. Like after a few months, like those guys won't get into a relationship, because when they do, that's when all the emotional patterns really start to emerge. They can't kind of keep up the facade.
Right. And yeah, and so they think and then like the honeymoon phase is over. Is that what you're talking about? And so then it becomes time for like real emotional connection with this girl, and you can't do that.
Yeah.
You probably didn't see it in your parents. You have no framework for it. So what are you going to do? Oh, I guess I'm just not built for relationships. I'm not built for monogamy. I'm just going to be a serial monogamous. Like, don't that's all. Yeah, if your rationalization makes you look cool, it's a rationalization, right? That's how you know. No, you're just out of touch. You're out of touch with your emotions. You don't know how to connect. You don't know how to do this thing that species expected. That is as innate, as essential for our happiness as the infant coming out and just, I got to see my mom's face. It's like a nurse. Oh, no, that's not it. Like the nurse doesn't make the imperceptible facial expressions that my mom makes. I need my mom's face.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. So we know that, you don't want to be a mom's boy, but here's one thing that's going to trigger the manosphere is, what about daddy's girls? Is there a negative? Can you flip that around, and is it negative?
To be a daddy's girl?
What is, like, let me put it this way.
Are you saying the manosphere likes daddy's girls?
Well, I think that they do. Yeah. I think that there's a subset, certainly, that, like, you want a girl who has a good relationship with her father, right? Okay. But now that we're talking about two different things.
Yeah. That's not a daddy's girl.
I know. Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of them, so just like the guy will, I suppose, like, when a guy's a mama's boy, he may have sexual liaisons with women, but he's emotionally connected to his mother. It's kind of like, the mom even kind of encourages it on an unconscious level very often. It's like, he's still mine. He can, see all these little girls, but he's now with a daddy's girl sort of situation. A lot of guys like those kind of girls because of her sort of hyper submissive sexual attitude towards him. But so bringing this stuff all in the play, like, just to talk a little bit about that dynamic and how it reflects as a pathology for the woman, and what problems it represents maybe down the line in a relationship.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, oof. How do I say this? I mean, I have the idea in my head. It's, you want a woman who's submissive in a certain context, because I think that's generally a healthy role for a woman in a relationship, in a certain context. But that doesn't mean she's not her own person. Doesn't mean she can't be self-sufficient if she needed to be. Mm-hmm. You don't want a girl. I mean, and the thing, I don't know. There's just a lot of knots to untangle, because like a lot of these manosphere guys, I mean, they're 20 years old. And I just think, like, yeah, if I had a Twitter account when I was 20, I'd be saying some really stupid things too. So I don't know how much of that to respond to. You want a woman to be submissive, not because she's supposed to be, not because that's how she's been trained, not because she's still wedded to this submissive nature she is with her father. You would want her to be submissive in a certain context because she's responding to your masculinity, and then she can relax in her lower testosterone body. That's,
and I guess And I guess
am I answering this well? I don't know. You can tell I don't talk about it. I don't talk about this stuff too much, but
well, I wanted to bring this sort of stuff up, and I have another one after this, just because I think so much about, okay, the issue with the guy, right? And I think about the issue, and I think about women obviously as well. You have to understand them with it. But like the mama's boy thing, if I'm having to work with guys who have this tendency, you kind of understand it inside and out. Of course, you can also maybe, like, I can relate to aspects of it as well. But it's interesting, okay, let's flip it around, because there is, especially when there is this sort of narrative that, oh, you want a girl who's, daddy's girl, you want her to call you daddy or whatever. There's a lot of guys who, and the thing is, you can sense that there's something off with it, but sometimes on the surface,
yeah.
it looks like it's okay. Now, is one of the big issues with this is that the woman, the girl doesn't have an identity, and so there's
Yeah.
there's a dramatism that she's going to bring, and that as a result, just like the mama's boy jumps from woman to woman for validation, the daddy's girl jumps from daddy to daddy.
Yeah, it's not going to be a genuine connection. But it sounds like also in that kind of scenario where the guy wants a daddy's girl, calling them daddy. It sounds like they don't like relationships.
I know. There's a lot here. There's a lot.
Yeah, relationships that they want to be easy,
Yeah.
right? It's just hilarious to me that I don't know if guys still complain about this, but how girls test men,
Mm-hmm.
and guys think like that's somehow terrible, or that's like she's like a modern woman and like a feminist if she's like, no, that means she likes you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, do you understand? It's tough. She's trying to test whether, I mean, to bring it back to what I would say, she's trying to test whether you have an identity. Are you who you really say you are? And then if you are, then she's going to be more likely to, submit and follow your lead, and all those great things that are part of a healthy female male dynamic. And if you don't believe me, I mean, just open up a biology textbook and tell me that there isn't a more dominant and less dominant sex. I mean, come on. But yeah, I think guys, and it makes sense that a guy who has mommy issues would like that, because what a mommy issue indicates, or what it means in real life, is you want everybody to love you like your mommy loves you, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of guys who I see criticizing modern women, not that there aren't problems, I guess, but I think there's problems with everybody. Just to single out modern women, guys who criticize that, is they want, they're not looking for a girlfriend, right? They're looking for a mom.
Yeah.
They're looking for somebody to love them automatically, unconditionally, like a mom would. And it's like, that's the attachment to the mother. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would say with the daddy's girl, like, just like the mama's boy, if he understands how women work or whatever, or if he understands how to game or whatever like that, they tend to be very like gamey, right? They run game. But then you have the daddy's girl does the same thing, actually. I mean, I've talked about it as girl game, and it's this sort of hyper express submissiveness, like doing all this nice stuff for you, super super sexually submissive. And for a lot of guys, it's like this
Yeah.
big fantasy, but it is just a fantasy. It's a temporary thing. Just like then those girls they'll jump in a few months to the next guy.
Yeah, you guys gotta get off Twitter and go talk to girls and integrate your emotions, get some experience. Because, like, as you say, girl game, I'm like, oh yeah, like that's the kind of thing that is like crack. So the right kind of guy. But when she's like, I'm telling you, like, there's another level of this. I know it sounds lame. I'm talking about emotions, but you gotta get emotionally in tune so you can just pick up on that. Because there's a smell test of that. You go, oh, that's I kind of know what's going on there, and you just won't even get to the phone number even.
Yeah, I mean, I dated a girl like that. Mama's boy dated a daddy's girl, and um and
Yeah.
it's funny because you can see the stuff. You can see, I look back on it and you can just see just how affected it was. you know, and I'm not even saying like consciously so much affected. Like there was also like like it felt genuine because there was an unconscious impulse from her also to do it. It wasn't like total fabrication. But
Yeah.
it's when you then have a genuine relationship, that's like you can just feel how different it is. There's so much, there's not that, like, even if it's sweet, you know, at first it's super fake and overdone at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
it's difficult to put in the words, but when I'm working with guys and they do go from the validation seeking relationship to a genuine connection and they try to talk to me about it, it's just like, yeah, it just feels really good.
Yeah.
I really love those moments with clients. It's like, yeah, you're trying to say it, you're putting your own words to it, but it's difficult, you know, and we can kind of talk around it, but there's something that's, you know, really magic that goes on when we can genuinely connect with people. And I think a lot of problems that you see going on in your life, it's not the problem. Patrick, I gotta say, I mean, this has been a lot of fun, but I need to get going.
I got you, man. Yeah, we're at 2 hours.
Yeah.
You're still, just tell us a little bit of your coaching stuff. So you're doing, you're obviously, you have your groups, you do personal stuff, or you just do group therapy?
Yeah. So the way I run my therapy now is I'll do, you go through the therapy with me. It's one-on-one, and I get you to the point where, you know, you know exactly what your issue is. You know what you think your problem is. Again, it's not your problem. That's usually step 4, step 5. Right? There's 3 or 4 steps there that you do unconsciously. It's an unconscious mismanagement of emotions. And I just get you very clear on what that is. I get you to describe it in a bunch of different ways. I get you to see it. Like you come and tell me where it comes up in your life. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. How did you respond? What was your reaction? Right. You get very clear about that. And then I start you to process that, which again, just means become aware. Just become aware, more and more aware of your unconscious emotions, how they come up in your life. So it just becomes more palpable, right? You can wrap your mind around it, and you can, and even gets to the point where, I mean, at first you don't notice it until maybe a day or two later, like, oh, I did the thing there. But I really want to get to the point eventually where you see it coming, like you can see like 10 seconds in the future. It's like, oh, here we go. I'm going to do it. Like, I feel like my body, like, because you're tuned into yourself, because you're not thinking about what the girl's thinking, because who cares what she's thinking? It's not right. It's actually disrespectful to care what anybody else is thinking, to care what she's thinking, because you're just tuned into yourself. But it's zero sum, right? If you're tuned out of yourself, unconsciously, you're going to be tuned in on other people. So we got to get you tuned into yourself, what you're feeling. And then then you see it, and then you can gradually, just enough awareness, get you really good at noticing. Do you notice what's going on? Do you see it? Right? Like I really like that documentary, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Have you ever seen that? It's this like a crazy Japanese guy, and he just is like world famous for this quality of sushi that he makes, and like people come from over the world. You know, he has this like like one table in his restaurant. It's like one of those kinds of things. And the obsessiveness over not everything, right? There's just like a few key moments in the sushi making process. And a big part of it is, you know, just like getting the right fish, you know, getting the right tuna. And they just get obsessed over 3 things. And that's it.
Yeah.
There's all these problems going on in your life. And I get it. It seems complex. It's simple. It's really simple. It's not easy. Right? It's like climbing a mountain, right? How do you climb Mount Kilimanjaro? Put one foot in front of the other. That's simple. It doesn't make it easy, but we can at least make it crystal clear, simple. So you can ultimately, I mean, that's the point of therapy. So you can become integrated and make the decisions you want to make and stop making the decisions that you want to stop making.
Absolutely incredible. And Mark, I said this at the beginning, but like I highly, highly recommend Mark. I mean, there's nobody who really does what he does, or maybe they're out there, but I don't know where to find them, right? I mean, it's one of the few people who I would really recommend to do this kind of work, and who has, you know, not only has both the rigor of psychological training, in the old school greats, but tons of clinical experience as well. His own take, his own approach. I'm going to put all the information about that below. So thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, bro.